Welcome to a new episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. I am Steve Wish and I'm joined by Jonathan for Doug. But it's been a little bit of time, my friend. How's things with you?
Hi, Steve. Hi, everybody. Good to be back on the show. Hope you are all keeping well. We've had a summer break in Allsvenskan, and of course, Mr. Meatman, you've had a little holiday, haven't you? So it's been a few weeks since we had an episode, but not much has happened in Sweden because we've had a summer break. But how have you been?
Well, I've been well. I had a good trip over to Switzerland, and then I came back home and got ill. So probably picked something on the plane, didn't I? But a bit rough for the last 2 or 3 days. So if I don't quite sound my normal self, then I do send my apologies to the listeners. But yeah, I'll be refreshed and ready for this this summer period now, where there's a lot of action over up in the Scandinavian leagues, Champions League, Europa League, Conference League qualifiers, which I always like. So yeah, crack on.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about. We've got a lot of listener questions as well. Twitter at Nordic Foot Pod. We've had our weekend previews intermittently at the moment. On the Patreon as well. So thanks so much for everyone who supported us on that, patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast. And of course on the Twitter and the YouTube. Steve, we've got a plethora of questions this week. So I don't even know where we're going to start, to be honest. But I probably will begin with a listener question because there's so many and a lot of them are in Norway. We're going to start this week in Norway. And then in part 2, we'll head over to Sweden and talk about the latest going on in Sweden. But Steve, as we sort of like pick up from where we left off the last episode, we talked about some of the key names, key themes of the season so far on the last main show. And as we look at the table at the moment, the top 3 is currently Brann, 3rd, Tromsø 2nd, and Glimt 1st. So it's a bit of a, with 12, 13 games gone, my first question to you is what if you're sort of licking your finger and waving it in the wind, what's the temperature of the Eliteserien at the moment? How would you sum up the season so far?
I think if you look at the table, there's a lot of surprises, isn't there? It's really strange if you look at certain positions of certain teams. Glimt top on 32 points. They went 11 games unbeaten, but even they've dropped some points recently. I suppose that's not a big shock. But then, Molde are down as low as 6th, having played a game less than a few teams around them. Rosenborg, Vålerenga are well down there. And, teams such as Tromsø, who we'll come to at some point again, just keep winning, don't they? So it's a strange old league table right now. But what I will say is it's a 30-game season, not a 12-game season, as we've had officially 12 rounds. Some teams have played more, some teams have played less. And I think come the end of proceedings, then there'll be perhaps a little bit more normality. But that's not a league table I expected at this stage of the season, mate.
Yeah, very strange goings on. I'll just sort of run through the table. For those who aren't aware, HamKam at bottom of the league. Arlesund as well in the relegation zone. Sandefjord, you got Rosenborg and Vålerenga just above the relegation zone, which is incredible, really. We're going to talk about them, both of them in detail. We've got a lot of questions about them. Then you've got Haugesund, Stabæk, Odd, Strømsgodset, and Lillestrøm 7th. You got Molde, who really sort of not doing as well as they did last season. Are they? Steve, currently 6th, 12 points behind Glimt. You got Sarpsborg, Viking, and Brann in 5th, 4th, and 3rd. And then, as we mentioned there, the Northern Lights, Tromsø and Glimt, top 2 of the league. This is incredible, really. So, it's quite a refreshing table, I have to say. It's very, very different to what we might have expected. I'm sure if we go back to your season previews, it's probably quite different to some of what you would have predicted. Obviously, the champions Molde are not having a great time with it so far. But I think in terms of talking points, Steve, the main talking point that we sort of really have to get into first is some sackings. There's been a lot going on at 2 particular clubs. I'm going to ask you some of the listener questions. I mean, we got Norway Brazil. At Norway Brazil says, talk about the situation of Rosenborg. We've also got a question from, well, to be honest, Steve, so many people. João Alberto Collins says, talk about Rosenborg. We've been expecting Enger's poor season. Santon 90 has described, I think, Rosenborg as a disgrace. So I think that's Brazilian, a bit of Brazilian, trying to translate it from Portuguese, sorry. But yeah, it seems there's a lot of good Norwegian-Brazilian connection listening to the pod, which is great to see. So yeah, Steve, I guess we've really got to start there with Rosenborg. Tell us what on earth is going on, Steve, because it seems to get from bad to worse, and there's been a lot of developments since we last had a show.
Well, yes, and it's been an ongoing issue all season, hasn't it, with Rosenborg? The pressure was piling up on Kjetil Rekdal. We had a big discussion, didn't we, about what we think was the right course of action for the club. He actually rebounded with a win against HamKam 4-0, and then drew 2-2 against Stabæk away, and they came from 2-0 behind to draw in that game. So it looked like perhaps he had ridden out a storm, but that match was on the eve of the international break, and you know what international breaks are like. Clubs often do sack managers during that period, and that's what they did. They let him go. I think ultimately the first 11 games had just not been good enough, 13 points from 11 games, and what they did was appointed Svein Malen as the manager until the rest of the season. Malen, who was on the coaching staff, former Ranheim manager, did a good job with Ranheim, I thought, when they were in the Eliteserien a few years ago. Immediately said, we're going to be bringing back entertaining football. We're going to be bringing back the traditional 4-3-3 formation. And I'll be honest with you, I actually expected them to beat Sarpsborg. I certainly expected them to beat Ålesund. And what's happened is they've got worse. They've lost both matches 3-0 at home to Sarpsborg, and then lost to Ålesund, who at that stage only had 4 points. An Ålesund side who'd lost 9 of their first 11 games. They couldn't even get a point there. So this is just turning into a horror show for Rosenborg. 13 points after 13 games. Keep that up, that's 30 points. And, that has seen teams be relegated before on that number.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest shock there is obviously that thrashing against Salzburg, who are having quite a good season. But, I mean, that's just unbelievable, really. What exactly has gone on in that game? Because they've lost 3-0 at home, which to me, I can understand why one of our listeners has called that a bit of a disgrace, to be honest. I mean, this is like kind of, put it into context, Steve, because we often describe Rosenborg as like the Bayern Munich of Norway. So this is like kind of a prolonged dry spell, isn't it, really? This is like a big downfall of a big club. I mean, if this was like France or Germany, you'd be saying this is like sort of PSG being near the relegation zone, or Bayern Munich, wouldn't you? I mean, this is quite, if you put it into, can you just put it into context how terrible results like that are for listeners who may be not aware of how big Rosenborg are?
It's a shambles. It's unbelievable. I mean, bear in mind, some people at the start of the season put them down as potential title challengers, dark horses for the title. I can't remember where I actually had them. I think I had them 4th, which was probably slightly lower than what some predicted them. No one could have foreseen this. It looked like Rekdal was doing a somewhat competent job at the club. And, who knows, if they kept him, maybe they would have got some results in the last 2. But in terms of the Sarpsborg game, I think what happened was, expectations were high again. They've completely changed the system from 3-5-2 to 4-3-3. And I don't really care who you are. That is a massive difference in the space of, effectively 7 days to 10 days. So that can happen sometimes. Their actual XG in the last 2 games, by the way, has been a combined 4.5, and they haven't scored a goal. So the new manager, Svein Malen, will argue, we are creating the chances, we're just not putting them away. A manager can do a lot of things, but he can't put the ball in the onion bag, can he, for the players? That said, in that game, most of their chances, they did come quite late in proceedings when the game was done. More worrying is that they go to Ålesund, a terrible goalkeeping error from Andre Hansen, one of the more experienced players, cost them the goal. And that was, they're always fighting a losing cause there. I think they should have got something out of the game, but absolutely everything's going wrong. He's been let down by senior players there. Confidence is low. The fans are on their back. It's an absolute crisis. I've never known anything like it. I never thought I would see the day where Rosenborg would be so low in the table.
Yeah, and it's not just low in the table. I mean, it's very, very low, isn't it? We're talking about, as I say, they're only just about clear the relegation zone, only 4 points above Sandefjord, who are in the relegation playoff at this moment in time. Sandefjord actually have 2 games in hand as well, as do Vålerenga, who are below Rosenborg in 13th. And of course, they're 6 points above the relegation to Arlesund and HamKam. And again, Rosenborg have played a game more than both of those. So if one of those was to win, you really would start to see the pressure on Rosenborg. Maybe even relegation is too early to. We're not calling relegation, are we, Steve? I don't think. But what is the main problem besides the managerial change in terms of squad personnel? We've got the transfer window about to open. What do they need to work on to turn this round? Because at the moment, 14 goals scored from 13 games and 19 conceded. So it looks like they're struggling for goals, not conceding a huge amount, but not exactly doing too well either on that front.
Well, injuries again are a big problem for this team. I've talked about this the last 2 or 3 years. They keep rearing their ugly head. Marcus Henriksen, the captain, key man, he's ruled out for the rest of the season with an injury. That occurred a couple of weeks ago. That's a massive blow. Tobias Borkit often seems to be on the treatment table. Ole Christian Saiter's injury, he's back now, but he missed a lot of game time, way more than expected. There's always someone going down, so they can't keep players fit. In terms of actually on the field, some of these players need to start stepping up, in my opinion. If they can't keep it tight defensively, they've got to find a way to win shootouts, like they were doing last year with Tengstedt. They got good money from him. I think they need to splash some cash in the summer transfer window and get some players in various different positions to make sure they get themselves out of trouble. But they need to start taking their chances, Jonathan, because like you said, 14 goals in 13 games, that's nowhere near really the required level. Remember, 4 of those goals were scored against HamKam as well. So, it's 10 goals from the other 12. I think it's the goal scoring department where they need to look at more. And that's where losing Tengstedt was a massive, massive blow. Irreplaceable player.
Yeah, and just a word on Svein Marlin before we move on. I mean, he's not in a permanent role, is he? I don't believe at the moment. Is it kind of a caretaker situation? What are his prospects? Obviously, he's lost 2 of his first 2 games. So where does he sit on that? Is it too early for us to sort of worry about him maybe being replaced at some point? Or what's his exact situation and how do you see him turning this around? I mean, you mentioned the formation change, but what's he got to do now? And how long can he be there for?
Yeah, he former Ranheim coach. I quite like him, to be honest. I enjoyed the football he played there. He's very familiar with the 4-3-3 system. I think I read somewhere that he claimed to be a Rosenborg fan. Don't know how true that is. Very familiar with the city of Trondheim, so he knows the culture up there. He knows how the club works. I actually thought it'd be a decent appointment to the end of the season, really. It still might be. I suppose he's on a prolonged job interview, isn't he, here now? But I just think the presumption was the results would immediately get better. Sarpsborg and then Arlesund, you're looking 4 points from those 2, aren't you? And they've not even scored a goal. So suddenly the pressure, I'm just looking at their next few games now. They've got home games against Lillestrøm and Tromsø, away to Godset, and then home to Odd. So after that, it's a soft sort of run of fixtures as well. So he's going to have the opportunity to get these results, more time at the wheel as such. They can't judge him on 2 games, but after say 5 matches, if they're still not getting wins, then I guess there will be calls, to replace him. The last time he was in the league, he got relegated with Ranheim. So I actually quite like the appointment though, Jonathan, I must say. Yeah,
I mean, reading some of the comments from Rosenborg fans, I'm not sure they necessarily agree with you. Some of them sort of saying he needs to leave already. But, that's Twitter for you. The replies that I'm able to load, considering that Elon Musk has practically destroyed the site beyond all recognition. But yeah, the few tweets I've been able to read just briefly, it sort of seems like jury's a little bit out on Marlin. But as you mentioned this, Marlin's at the wheel. So let's see where it goes. Famously, one Norwegian manager at the wheel didn't turn out too well a couple of years ago. Let's move on to the issues at another massive club, Steve, because one place below them is Vålerenga. And, no disrespect to Glimt, Tromsø, Brown. We're going to get to them in a minute, the winners of this league so far. But these are 2 compelling stories, aren't they? The bottom of the table, really, bottom end of the table. Vålerenga, on earth is going on with them. We do have, I think, a couple of listener questions on them. But generally speaking, it's just, what's really happening with them, Steve. I think that's the main thing. I mean, at EVC 1248, he asks, who's having a worse season, Vålerenga or Rosenborg, which is an interesting question. But another one from Jenna M20, Jen, she says, where do you think Vålerenga will finish this season? Their form hasn't picked up as expected with the management, and they continue to see goals in the last minute. So what exactly is going on here, Steve, as well? It seems like another sort of catastrophe club at the moment.
I feel like I've been waiting about a whole year for these sort of episodes, Jonathan. We didn't have a single sacking last season, did we? So the shit was always going to hit the fan, wasn't it? In 2023.
You've had to hold your tongue for a season, not being able to slam any managers. So now it's fill your boots time.
12 months ago, I advised anyone from the hierarchy of Vålerenga to listen to this show that they should sack Dargaile Fagermo, and they didn't do it. And it was actually a good decision from them because he had a really good second half of the season. And I held up my hands and said, "Fair play." I thought he had lost the team, the dressing room, everything, but he managed to rebound. But what hasn't happened is they just haven't kicked on at the start of this season. 10 points from 11 games. I think the big turning point was the derby match against Lillestrøm, where they were 3-1 up and they lost 4-3. I don't think really they mentally recovered from that, even though they did bag a couple of wins afterwards. It was against poorer teams, though. So, since then, it just hasn't gone their way. Lost against Stabæk, another local derby. When you keep losing to local teams, that's infuriating for fans, isn't it? I mean, it's like you losing to, I'm trying to think, it's like Leeds losing to all Yorkshire clubs. You get fed up with it in the end. It's more sort of merit points against a manager who perhaps didn't have that much credit in the bank anyway. So the decision was made to sack Dargaile Fagermo finally after losing against Godset at home 1-0 on 11th of June. And I can't really knock them. I think if you look in the last sort of, 3-4 years, they've fleetingly threatened to have decent moments. And you've got to respect Fagermo. He's a very experienced manager. What he achieved last year to turn things around, fair play to him. But it just felt like times needed to change. But surprisingly, they've kept on Jan Frode Nornes as his assistant manager. He's in temporary charge until they find a new boss. Now, Nornes has said he's ruled himself out of it, but I would have sacked the whole coaching team and said, get out of there and just bring in someone else. Honestly, it wouldn't be the worst idea to bring back Kjetil Rekdal, to be honest. Club legend. I think he could sort them out, Vålerenga, but massive club, not just... we need more from this club, in Oslo. When was the last time they were even in the medal positions? I can't remember, Jonathan. It's just not good enough.
Yeah, and I think in terms of that as well, you mentioned quite a big club, and talk to us about the player sales that they've had to make over the years, Steve, because they've had quite a lot of player turnover, haven't they? They sell a lot of players, don't they? Just talk us through some of the players that they've moved on in the last sort of 18 months. I mean, that can't help sort of the sustainability of the club, can it? I mean, it's kind of like it kind of reminds me a little bit of Leicester, doesn't it? When you're just constantly losing players to a certain extent. How would you sort of factor that into their maybe mini downfall? And just name some of the players they've lost, because obviously for those who don't know.
Well, Osam Sahari was the big loss this winter. Recently, they've just lost Odin Thiago home to Celtic. Players are constantly going out the door. I mean, that's what happens in Norwegian football, though. You've got to have a contingency plan, going forward. It doesn't help, of course, doesn't help matters, but that's where you need the operation to keep that conveyor belt going, like I said. In terms of the players in the squad, I think it's a good enough squad that should be mid-table. Probably not a lot higher than that, in fairness. But yeah, there's just a lack of performances. Offensively, I think they're too disjointed. Henrik Hegheim had a reasonable loan spell with them, and now he's gone back to Bromby after a loan spell. Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at my spreadsheet now. There's no way this team should be fourth bottom of the table on just 10 points, Jonathan. They should be doing a lot better. So, I mean, who do you hang this on? Is it the manager? Is it the recruitment?
I mean, four straight defeats as well. A lot of them just by the odd goal. Is it bad luck a little bit as well, a part of it, or is it, how do they fix this going forward?
Well, metrics, right? They actually have the seventh best expected goals in the league at 1.58 per game, which isn't bad. The other end of the field, they've got the fifth best expected goals against. Now, based on that, you'd expect them to be mid-table. So I think there has been a bit of an unlucky aspect to it. Yes, there has. And that over the course of a season, that sort of thing usually evens itself out. So again, it's often what happens in both boxes, isn't it? Players not taking their chances, or individual mistakes defensively costing a team at the wrong moments. And even at the weekend, they did well to get back into the game against Viking, equalised late, and then conceded in the 96th minute. So that rather sums up Vålerenga, doesn't it? I saw enough in that fixture to suggest that things might potentially improve, but they need to sort a permanent manager situation out really as soon as possible. But I would expect them to finish around 8th to probably 11th now this season. There's enough quality in this squad to go down. But we've said this before. Big teams have been relegated from Eliteserien in recent years.
Yeah, and it was a brilliant winner to sort of win the game for Viking at the weekend from Sandberg. Lovely left-footed free kick in the 96th minute. So a real heartbreaker for Vålerenga, who would obviously got back into the game with an 85th minute penalty from Strandberg. I think one observation I have with the Vålerenga is they seem to be so open, I think, in transitions at times. I just think attack to defense transition seems to be very open. On occasions, don't know if that's a new manager thing or if that's been a hanging issue. But yeah, maybe stability-wise, are there any transfers that they could help them in this summer window coming up? And how badly will they miss Holm? Because tell us what Celtic fans can expect from him.
Well, he's a raw young talent still. I think he's good, really good technical ball striker, passer, got decent vision. Lacks a little bit physically, perhaps. He might have to toughen up a little bit in those in the Scottish League. Where players will get stuck into him hard, so that could be something that he has to work on. But they've got no doubt they've signed a really good technical ball striker. I think the rumor is roughly around 2.5 million. I'm not sure how accurate that is. In terms of what the Vålerenga actually need, they need to replace him for a start in midfield. They need a little bit more quality in midfield, and they absolutely need to sort out the defence because Christian Borchgrevink is still injured. This is now a year and a half out, and I think we've got to write him off. He's only 25 years old, but he may well be finished because this knee injury or whatever, it's just taking too long, and he's having setback after setback. Horrible story, but he may well be finished at this level of football. So it would be a real shame. Supposedly he's due back in August now, I think, but I'll believe it when I see it. So they need to sort the right back situation out. They need probably another centre back now that Hegheim's gone. And so that's definitely some big areas. And then offensively, I think they need to work out who the hell they're going to go with. Someone needs to sort out Turger Berman's form, or I could see him leaving the club. Off-Keer and Harkins have got quality in them, but they're not producing. Off-Keer was brilliant last season for Sandefjord. He's had just 2 or 3 decent games this term. So the next manager just needs to get the most out of that attacking unit because there's decent youngsters like Dicko Eng, Jatta, like I said, Bjordal's there. Yeah, the talent, there's enough talent. They do need to reinforce in some areas, though.
And just in terms of Holm, you've mentioned him there as a sort of an attacking player, maybe slightly sort of lightweight physically. Is Brendan Rodgers a manager that would sort of enjoy working with him, if you know what I mean? Can he be someone that improves him as a player? And what kind of style of player is he? Because obviously 2003 born, so he's 20 years old. But what kind of style of footballer is he?
I think Brendan Rodgers has a good reputation with youngsters, does he? You might know better than me there, actually. Great hire, really, for Celtic. Quite a coup, isn't he? To be honest, had success there before. Should dominate the league. So, yeah, what sort of player is he? He's an exciting player to watch. He's not a boring player. Good technically, got some skills, and it'd be interesting to see him develop. He's still really young. Plays centrally, sort of attacking midfield role. And I'm expecting him to go well at Celtic.
Yeah, good stuff. Brendan Rodgers, obviously leaving Leicester, and has now got returned to Celtic. Just in terms of the transfer itself, because I don't think we did discuss it too much detail. I mean, he's only made 10 League 7 appearances this season, but the transfer is about €3 million according to the transfer market. So massive outlay really for a Norwegian talent. A Norway under-21 international central midfield player at 20 years old. So, I mean, I've seen a bit of him and I think he's got real potential. So be very interesting to see how he adapts to the Scottish League, especially as a league that kind of at times technical players, depends how they'll fare in quite a physical league with a lot of second balls. But let's move on. That's Odin Holm. We've still got quite a few other talking points on this show this week. So we'll stay in Norway. Of course, Steve, let's ask you about... let's move on to a question about Tromsø, because obviously Glimt are top. Don't think many people would be too surprised about that, but I'm pretty sure a lot of people would be fairly surprised about the team that's in second place here. What is going on? I mean, I know earlier in the season you've kind of talked them down, said that we shouldn't really pay much attention to them. I think was a kind of just quoting you a little bit. Luka Stefanovic at Foki CS says a little bit about Tromsø's current run, please. And a few other questions as well about Tromsø from listeners. So tell us.
Well, to be honest, I'm still kind of putting them down a little bit because I keep looking at their metrics and there's no way they can keep sustaining this at all. But they have won 5 games in a row in the league and they're up to second place. They've got a game in hand as well on Bodø Glimt. In fact, I saw Heskebo, a big fantasy guy, and I know he has listened to this podcast in the past, tweet something interesting on, it was while Bodø Glimt were losing against Molde, I think tongue-in-cheek, he said, the Eliteserien title is in Tromsø's hands if results stay as they are. So at that stage, if they had won all the remaining games, they would be champions. But look, if they get in the medals, I'd be stunned. I really would, because this is when we're talking some stats now. And, their expected goals per game is 1.07, which is the 4th worst in the league. Now, they've averaged 1.42 goals per game, so it's a significant overachievement. At the other end of the field, they actually have the best defensive record in terms of goals conceded at 0.92 per game, but their XGA is 1.51. Now, I'm sorry, that's just lucky. Both ends of the field, and when those combine, then you end up with a team that significantly overachieves for a while. So that they cannot sustain that unless they obviously improve their actual performances or metric performances. So you've got to give them a lot of credit because they found a way to win games, but I just cannot see them keeping it up, Jonathan. I really can't, because when I watch them play, they never dominate games. They just do enough, and they've scored a few late goals in fixtures. Well set up, well disciplined, but I can't get excited about them because their underlying metrics are they're not just poor, that they're really poor,
Not just poor, but really poor. That's the verdict of Meatman Soccer on the second best team in Norway at the moment in terms of points. Fair enough. I guess from that you're expecting a correction then. I mean, you predicted them pre-season to be mid-table. You've got them as 9th in pre-season. Do you want to sort of revisit that, or are you still thinking that they're going to sort of fall away and end up around 9th?
Well, they'll fall away. It's just a question of by what degree. And I think it's more about what teams I think will finish above them. I certainly think Molde will finish above them. Brann should. Viking probably will. Sarpsborg, I think, play better football, although they're more streaky. So that alone is what 4 or 5 more teams that should finish above them. Lillestrøm may well eventually. I think 7th or 8th, maybe for Tromsø down the line. It's just a remarkable run, though, I must say. The manager himself has got the absolute most out of the team. You've got to give credit to Gauta Hellstrup, who's proven himself to be one of the best coaches in this league. That's what football's about, really, isn't it? Getting extracting the maximum from your players and turning it into game managing fixtures, things like that. So he, at the moment, has to be coach of the season without question. Tromsø fans will be getting excited, though, and I don't want to piss on their bonfire too much here, because these are obviously good times for them, and I know there's a lot of Tromsø fans that listen to this podcast. But I honestly, I'm the sort of person, I've just got to... I'm not just a results man, me, Jonathan, in sport. It's got to look good in terms of on the eye, and it's got to look good statistically as well to convince someone like myself. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've not seen as much Tromsø as you have, so I'll yield to your superior knowledge on that. But what a great time for Tromsø fans. I mean, obviously, they've been lived in the shadow of Bodø Glimt for so long at the moment. I mean, they're still technically in their shadow at the moment. Obviously, Glimt top of the league, but it's good to see them having a fight back, really. And since they lost that derby game against Glimt 3-2, they've actually won 5 straight. So certainly can't be criticised. I mean, Mai Traore, someone I've liked a lot, played in Sweden. I've seen him getting on the score sheet a couple of times. Steve, who are the key men behind this rise of Tromsø?
Well, Vegard Erlien's had a good season. They brought him in from, I think it was Ranheim, for a free. Scored 14 goals in the Obos last year. He's looked good from the penalty spot. He scored from open play, so he's been a key player for them in the offense. Defensively, I think Nicholas Vesterland's had a great year again for them. Gundersson's been solid as well. And the goalkeeper, Jakob Hårgaard, I think has had an exceptional campaign. Really impressed with Hårgaard, former AIK player, of course. So, yeah, those are, I would say, probably the key individuals. They've actually had a few injuries as well, so it's not like it's been plain sailing for them. So to be where they are is pretty remarkable. Indeed. And, the only real downside for them recently is losing the derby to Bodø Glimt in both league and cup. They had a gut-wrenching defeat against them in the cup. They were 2-0 up with 15 minutes to go, and they lost with 2 goals in injury time last week. So, many a team would have folded the next round, wouldn't they, after that? But they went to Lillestrøm. It's a tough place to go and won 1-0. So you mentioned Mai Traore that he got the goal. Decent player, actually, when he stays fit. He's always got a niggle of some sort, but he's a decent enough player. Good luck to them if they can keep this going. At the end of the day, every single division, every single season in different countries, there's always an overachieving team, right? It happens. It's football. It might be their year. Whoever does well is going to overachieve metrically speaking, aren't they? So can they keep it up? What they can do is maybe improve the level of performances. Maybe they can sign some players, and then they're actually maybe dominating games more. So it's interesting if they can kick on from this point.
Yeah, great stuff. So congratulations to Tromsø. They're having a good season, and it'd be wrong of us to knock them too much. But as you said, that you're not only looking at results, you're looking at trends and performances. That's what you're brought here to do on the Nordic Football Podcast. So good insight there, valuable insight. I'm going to move on to Glimt. There's been a controversy in the game against Molde. Steve, let's just tell us what happened in this game first. Who won, or what was the result, and a little bit of context between the two teams, like going into this match. How were they faring? Because it's been a up and down season for both of it, hasn't it? Tale of two teams.
Yeah, this felt like a big game. Bodø Glimt came into it off the back of losing to Godset 2-0, which no one saw that result coming. It was a real shock. Presumption was they would rebound. But Molde, remember, beat them 3 times in competitive competitions last year. And I think there was I had this feeling inside me that they maybe have got their number a little bit with the tactics and formations and stuff. But after 14 minutes, Molde were reduced to 10 men. The goalkeeper, Karlström, got sent off. I think someone actually asked a question about this red card. I can't remember who it was, and asked what I thought about it. I don't think it was red. It was on VAR. The goalkeeper came out of his area, hit his chest onto his arm, and the referee sent him off. Now, I think that was harsh. You know, it's not like it was deliberate handball. I don't know what the letter of the laws are. Again, I'm not going to get involved with that bollocks anymore. But it looked to me like it should have been a yellow card and get on with the game. Nevertheless, you down to 10 men away at Bodø Glimt. Disaster. But Molde scored 2 goals in that. I think in the first half, I'm trying to remember exactly when the second goal was scored. Bryn Hilton on the break got a couple of goals against the 10 men. So, I mean, that really put the cat amongst the pigeons. And it took Bodø Glimt the whole second half to eventually equalise. They had an expected goals. I think it was 5.3 in this game. That's the most I think I've ever known in a league game anywhere. Like, seriously, I think that's an outrageous number of expected goals in one match for them to only score 2 goals. But Ulrich Soltnes, who's recently back from injury, bagged an equaliser 93rd minute. That's a big goal for Glimt because, you know, they couldn't afford to lose to Molde again. It keeps them 12 points above Molde. I still think Molde are the team they fear the most out of all those chasers. So it as long as they kick on from that and get a few more results, then it should be all right for Bodø Glimt, but it was a worry for them when they're 2-0 down against 10 men.
Yeah. I mean, we've got Europe coming up as well, Steve. Where are the Norwegian teams sitting in that? We've got competitions to think about. Teams at the top, obviously, that can affect rotation and stuff like that. Just give us an overview of that before we wrap up part 1 on this show.
Well, I think Molde, obviously in the Champions League, it's a tougher run because you're playing better teams. And they've suddenly hit an injury problem. Some of the squad are struggling with injuries, and that could be a problem for them. Bodø Glimt, we know around this time of year can start to become vulnerable, but they're in the Conference League qualifier. So the first couple of fixtures, they'll be well seeded now for that, Glimt, because they've had some good seasons. They should get through fairly straightforward, I think. I've not looked at the draw or anything like that. But it shouldn't get too tricky for them. Brann are obviously in Europe now because they won the Norwegian Cup, and I'm really, really worried about Brann's squad depth. They've just lost a couple of players, Wolf and Rasmussen, who they've sold to, I think, Belgium and Holland, respectively. Got some money for it, but their squad is really lacking depth, and that could be a massive problem in Europe. So, you know, who the teams that are not in Europe, you know, Tromsø, Viking, Sarpsborg, maybe be licking their lips potentially. I'm not sure I'm expecting an awful lot from the Norwegian teams in these qualifiers. I think that it's not easy for them.
Not easy for them, and that is the verdict of Meatman Soccer. I mean, Molde, a word on them, Steve. Do you think they can turn this season around and maybe compete for the titles, or do you consider them out of it?
They should finish second. They're still by far, them and Glimt have the best 2 squads, hands down. It's not even close. So Molde really should eventually rebound. You know, other teams will drop points. I still think they'll finish in second place. Bodø Glimt should win the title from here. Molde in second place. Take your pick for third. Could be anyone. Molde somehow just ballsed up with losing those 5 games early on in the first 11. But they will pick up form again. But, you know, with Europe now knocking on the door, they might drop some points as well. But in terms of the squad, it's still fantastic.
Yeah, and a couple questions. Just want to make sure you actually clarify you answered Jen's question, Steve. I'm not sure if you did about where Vålerenga will finish. I'm not sure if you did answer that, or maybe I might be mistaken. But you got a verdict quickly on that one, maybe just in a word? Or
9th to 11th. Yeah, 9th to 11th, I think Vålerenga will finish now.
9th to 11th. Thanks so much, Jen. And then we've got a couple of questions around Glimt before we wrap up part 1, Steve. First one I'm going to ask you is Vetlesen and Mvuka replacements for Bodø Glimt. That's from Guppy FPL at Guppy Fish, whose bio says N'Golo Kante is the greatest footballer to step foot on planet Earth, which I find it hard to disagree with that, to be honest. And so what are your thoughts on that, Steve? And then also João Alberto Colling, hopefully I've pronounced that right, at Jack Colling, the Kasper Ho transfer room and the rumours of interest from Bodø Glimt. So Kasper Ho, who I might be one of your 10 to watch, I can't remember. Vetlesen and Mvuka replacements for Glimt. So just tell us about the transfer window of Glimt and the rumours and that.
They've lost Hugo Vetlesen and they've lost Joel Mugisha. We knew about Mugisha from the start of the season. He goes back to Lorient. 5.5 million was that transfer. Vettelson has again got them good money to Bruges, rumored to be, I think, was it 7 or 8 million. So in terms of replacing them, Ulrich Saltner's come straight back into the team. He's been injured all year, so it's almost like for like in a way. I'm sure they'll get someone else as well, but it's handy that Saltner's is coming back there. And I said at the start of the season, watch out for this lad, Nino Zugail, who I think will get a lot more minutes now. He scored a goal against Tromsø in the Cup recently. He'll play on either wing, cut inside. He may well take Mugisha's place. As for Kasper Wartz-Ho, I actually don't think a target man striker like him suits the Glimt system. It didn't work with Lars Jørgen Salvesen, who's very, very similar to him. So I wouldn't go down that route if I was them. I don't think big target man striker works for Glimt, so I actually don't like the idea of that signing if they go ahead with it.
Where would be a better fit for him because he's having a decent season?
Well, if I'm Rosenborg, they need a goal scorer, a big lad. Could do a lot worse, especially, I think he's looked really good at Stabæk, and I think that what's happened is Stabæk have snapped him up on a transfer. He was on loan. They've gone for the permanent deal, but he's going to leave straight away somewhere because he's obviously caught the eye so much. Yet another 10 to watch from the Nordic Football Podcast with a mid-season transfer. So add those to the numbers down the years. Yeah,
there's quite a few of them actually, and there's one we'll probably talk about in part 2. So there's definitely been pretty prolific. Patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast. If you haven't listened to our 20 to watch in Norway and Sweden this season, because quite a few of them are already getting big moves, and as we'll talk about that as well in part 2. So good shout, good call out there, Steve. Good, nice work. And before we wrap up, Steve, just who are the top scorers in the league at the moment? Do you have that to hand? Top assist providers?
Pellegrino, probably. If we look, Pellegrino, 12 goals. Bård Finner, 11. Akor Adams, 10. And Pemi Mumbanya, 9 for Bodø Glimt. Erlien with 7 goals for Tromsø ranks up the top 6 scorers.
That'll do for part 1. Thanks so much to all the listeners for your questions. Really appreciate it. In part 2, we will talk about Sweden. Allsvenskan's back, first week since the summer break. We'll look at a lot of transfers that have taken place and a lot more. There's been a few other managerial sackings. So stay tuned for part 2 after this short break.
Welcome back to the Nordic Football Podcast. I'm Steve Wiss and I'm with Jonathan Verdugberg. We're going to talk about the Swedish Allsvenskan now, which has returned from its early summer break. We've actually not missed an awful lot, really, since in terms of on the field, since we last did an episode, I don't believe, Jonathan. But nevertheless, I will actually run through the results from this weekend. There weren't that many goals around. 6 out of the 8 fixtures did end under 2.5 goals. Malmo 3, Sirius 0, Degerfors 0, Värnamo 2, Brommapoikana 0, AIK 2, Norrköping and Häcken drew 2-2, Halmstad 0, EF Gothenburg 0, Djurgården with a 2-0 win over Varberg, Mjällby 1, Kalmar 1, and Elfsborg keep going on strong with a 2-0 win against Hammarby. What we're going to start with here is, it's a theme of sackings, isn't it, this show? AIK have sacked Brandstrom, Henningberg, new manager. When did this actually happen, Jonathan? What time scale? Because we know he's been under pressure all season. You actually predicted this would happen as early as round 2, I think. So no surprise to you. But tell us the time scale and the chain of events which led to this.
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. And thanks for everyone who's subscribed to our YouTube channel, YouTube Nordic Football Podcast, hitting 500 subscribers, more or less, and also who's subscribed to the Patreon as well. We really appreciate your support. Just to quickly say that before we get into part 2. But Yeah, the timeline for this was it's quite strange actually, Steve, because you did mention there, with all respect to Brandstrom, he's had a decent career to date, and I'm sure he's going to learn a lot from this. The former Mjällby manager, I have to be honest, Steve, he had a bit of a haunted look about him from day one. I mentioned it in the early podcasts. I just said, without wanting to condemn a man before he can even get to work, I just said it just has a little bit of a. It just seemed to me in public to sort of not have a complete grip of the situation of the club. And I think for any manager going into like a massive club like AIK, they're one of the biggest teams in Sweden. They're not maybe expected to win the league this season, but they're expected to have a good season. And I think sometimes for managers who from smaller clubs who get a big job, you need, even if you don't have a big reputation behind you, you need a big personality to go into a club from day one and say, right, this is my stamp on this club. And anyone who's not going to buy into it, you're out. And to be honest, Steve, it's not really easy because as a manager, there's a lot of politics going on that you can't control. I'm pretty sure Brandstrom was not in charge of some of the recruitment this summer or this winter, sorry. So I don't even think some of the players he really wanted around, maybe a lot of fallouts of players. But in terms of the time frame of it, obviously we just come back from the summer break. You would have thought, Steve, with a 3-week break, get rid of your manager then, bring in someone new and let them have the time to work on training. But they've done the complete opposite of that. They've brought them, they've let him manage the club throughout the whole of the summer break. They've won 2-0 against Bromma, a decent result away from home. Got themselves back on track, their first win in quite a while. Look like they may be about to sort of get things moving again with a clean sheet. And then sack the manager the next day, pretty much. It was an extraordinary board meeting was called, apparently. The directors, obviously, there's a lot of changes going on, Steve, at AIK at the moment. They've got a new sporting director, a new chief scout, which we could talk about in a minute. A lot of behind-the-scenes things going on. And I guess at that extraordinary board meeting, they've come to a decision that Brandstrom's no longer the man for them. They've got rid of him, and they've immediately, pretty much within an hour or so, announced Henning Berg, former Manchester United treble-winning manager, as their new manager. Now, Berg comes in with a decent reputation. He will be expected to lift the club. But I do think that the timing of it is a bit weird because, as I say, they just won a game. You always want to give a manager a bit of a chance, but I feel like the decision has probably already been made. And they were just waiting for the right time to announce it, maybe.
I must say, it did seem like a weird chain of events. They win and then they sack someone, but yeah, probably already decided whatever the outcome there. Henning Berg, I mean, I don't know an awful lot about him. I think I remember he managed at Stabæk a few years ago. My mind is blank. I generally can't remember anything about that spell he had at Stabæk. I don't know why. Nothing sticks out in my mind. He is known for being a bit of a no-nonsense sort of guy overall, isn't he, though? So maybe that's what... It was a big character. Perhaps that's what AIK need.
Well, and the interesting thing is, you mentioned the spell there. I mean, can you remember his spell at Blackburn? He was actually manager of Blackburn.
No, I was just looking actually now at his managerial appointments, right?
I'd forgotten about that.
Lillestrøm, Blackburn, Lecce Warsaw, Videoton, which I think is Hungary, I think. Stabæk, Ammonia, Paphos. So he's been sunning himself in Cyprus for a while. I can't remember what his actual managerial style's like at all. Just the man himself always comes across as quite domineering,
100%. Obviously, been a part of a really successful team. Obviously, trebles are in fashion at the moment, aren't they? With a certain team across town.
He was part of the Man United treble-winning team.
Yeah, Berg was a starting.
Really?
One of the main
he was
players,
a starting centre back. No, was he?
Well, it was Stam and Jonsson, and Berg was there as well.
The first backup, yeah.
Ronnie Jonsson. Yeah.
Fair play.
So he was part of that squad.
I can't remember that either.
It was a long time ago now. So, but those who are of that persuasion will not forget that team. So he's part of that treble-winning squad. No-nonsense defender. Obviously, learned under great managers like Sir Alex Ferguson. He's got his own style. He's been pretty successful, to be fair to him. I mean, we mentioned there he's had a lot of different jobs, but he has won titles. He's won the league title with Omonia Nicosia in Cyprus in 2021, and he won the Super Cup there as well in 2022. And he won the Polish League with Legia Warsaw in 2014 and the Polish Cup in 2015. So he has had some measure of success, as you mentioned there. I think he's got Cypriot citizenship. I don't know if that's through being in the country for so long or Not entirely sure. I don't know if he has a Cypriot background. I'm not too sure about that. But yeah, of course he played for Blackburn, didn't he, as well? I remember him playing for Blackburn and then obviously got his move to Manchester United. It was about 7 million at the time. I remember that in the 90s. In terms of how he's going to come in, I mean, I think the clear contrast here, Steve, from me is like it feels like they've gone for a manager who is a little bit overawed by the AIK atmosphere, maybe. I've mentioned it on this podcast many times. AIK are in a bit of a mess at the moment. Just loads of accusations about payments to agents, dodgy transfers, player signings that aren't really necessarily above board, maybe backhanders, favours, lots of rumour and accusations flying around. Not from us, I might just add, these are just what the media reports tell us. So nobody come back to me and say that we're making this up or whatever, but these are media reports and investigations that are taking place. And it just feels like a club they're trying to now, with sort of various people upstairs are leaving the club. It feels like they're just trying to sort themselves out now. And I feel like they've looked at the Brandstrom situation and just thought he's not quite authoritative enough maybe for us. And we need someone with a bit more authority. And I think Berg probably offers that. He's someone who's going to come in. He's a proven winner at different levels. You know, he's managed in other countries. He's won titles. And I think that's probably Brandstrom's CV. I think that's a clear contrast. You know, Berg's a bit of a star in this part of the world, isn't he? In Scandinavian football, he's a bit of a, he's achieved a lot in his career. So I think that's the clear contrast. And I think that might sort of cheer up AIK fans. From what I understand, he likes a 4-2-3-1 system. So I think he might try and bring in a more attacking style necessarily. They've also announced quite a few transfers coming up. The transfer window opens this week in Sweden this weekend on the 7th. So I think that there's going to be a lot of changes going on at AIK. And, let's not forget, Steve, they are doing really badly in the league this season. I mean, even that win against Bromma Poiken has only taken them to, they're still 14th in the league. I mean, they're still in the relegation playoff, even with that win. And it's only the second win all season. So they've only beaten 2 teams, and both of them from Stockholm. Bromma and Hammarby. I mean, it's incredible how bad their season's been, really.
You'd certainly expect them to stay up there. I mean, on paper, they've got the squad, which should be at least mid-table, you would imagine. Do you expect Henningberg to comfortably lead them to safety?
I said all along, I don't think they'll go down. I don't think EFK will go down, but as the season goes on, you start to run out of. I mean, we're a game ahead of Norway, so we're sort of 13 to 14 games played, and we're approaching 15th game, so we're nearly at the halfway point of the season. And if you look at AIK, I mean, they're 5 points behind Vålerenga, who were in 11th, so they're still, that's not too hard to make up, but they've got a bit of work to do, really. They need to get a move on. But there's much worse teams in the league, in my opinion. They've got a good squad. I think their recruitment will be decent. They've brought in a new chief scout, who goes by the name of, I think, Fredrik Visor Hansen, who we've approached to see if maybe he'd be interested in coming on the show to have a little chat. So if you're listening to this, then you'd be more than welcome. So he's going to go in there, and I guess he's got a good knowledge of the Norwegian leagues, and it looks like they're going to recruit quite heavily from Norway already. There's been 1 or 2 players mentioned and linked and rumours. I don't think they'll go down, Steve. Bottom line.
Moving on to another managerial change, and this regards the bottom team at Varberg. Now, this is, I do believe, an interesting one. They didn't sack him, did they? Is that being poached by someone else?
Yeah, Varberg, their manager's gone to Horsens in Denmark. Obviously, he's replacing Jens Bertlasku, who's just gone to IFK Göteborg. So I believe they're in the 2nd division, or I'm not sure if they got relegated, or not sure where they finished last year. Maybe you might be able to help me out with that, Steve. But he's been offered that job, and I guess from Joachim Persson's point of view, Varberg, I predicted them to get relegated, and I just feel like we're looking at the end of the line for Varberg this season. Unless they're still looking for a new manager at the moment, unless they find someone who can really have an impact. I fear for Varberg. I just think that the issues they've had for ages, they're having now, and I'm not really sure about Persson in terms of his responsibility and all that. This 40-man squad and everything. We've joked about it a few times on the show, Steve, haven't we, in the past? I'm not really sure how much responsibility he has for that. I think he is someone who generally runs the whole club to a certain extent. I think he's a bit of a Wenger type manager. Varberg doesn't have a big budget, so I think he is responsible for a lot of that. And just the so many players they have, they just don't really have much of an identity. I'm guessing he's looked at the opportunity at Horsens and just thought this is a great chance for me to, instead of go back to Super Etten, let's cash in my chips and get out to Denmark, try something new. So I feel like sinking ship, really.
Yeah, he's abandoning a sinking ship. They haven't even won a game of football yet. I've got to be honest, I would be really intrigued what his new club really see in him. No offense here. I would not be hiring a manager who's not won any of a game yet this season. But that's just me. There's lots of different reasons for appointments, but it does seem a bit of a strange one, I must say. Not looking too great for Varberg. Just while we're talking about managers, a question here from History Russia, who often comes up with some interesting questions. Thanks very much for this one. How much longer can Marti Cifuentes cling on at Hammarby? And when does Zlatan cash out? Probably in reference to the defeat 2-0 against Elfsborg on the Monday night. I actually watched this game, and to be honest, they didn't offer much, Jonathan. I was really disappointed in them.
Yeah, well, you didn't help me out with that Horsens question, so I'll start by answering that one myself. They were relegated from the Super League, and so obviously football in Denmark, shout out to Henry. They've been relegated, so they're going to be playing in the second tier, Stephen. So maybe Persson thought second tier in Denmark is more attractive than second tier in Sweden, which he's been there and done. Just on your point about Persson not winning game this season, I do think he's got a little bit of ability as a manager. He's obviously brought them up. He's done quite well over the years. Varberg, let's be honest, Varberg are a Super Etten side really in terms of infrastructure. They've done really well to be in the league for they've been there now. This is I think their fourth season. So they have done very well to finish where they are. And obviously they always lose their players as well. They don't have big budgets, and he kind of runs most of it. But I just think that the whole project maybe has come to a natural closing point. So I'm not massively surprised to see him get an opportunity like that in Denmark. If you look at Jens Bertelascu, who we've had on this podcast, of course, he's got them relegated and got the EF core job, Steve. So if you flip it on its head, you know what I mean? They're not obviously that worried about, like that doesn't necessarily impact it. It's more about what he can do as a coach. And I do think Persson's quite a sort of, he's still got a decent reputation. I don't think his reputation is going to fall apart because of Varberg's season necessarily. Just in terms of Hammarby, to answer the question, yeah, I think it's a manager who has been linked with Hearts. A lot of talks that Cifuentes was going to be either offered or take the job in Hearts in Scotland, of course. Didn't quite happen. I think they have appointed a manager, and the bits I saw the bit of the Elfsborg game, and Elfsborg were just a much better team. I mean, we have to talk about Elfsborg in a minute. They're definite title contenders. I think we have to consider them in maybe almost a 2-horse race. And I think with Hammarby, I don't get whispers feeling like making me think he's going to get sacked or anything like that. I think there's almost a club-wide acknowledgement that this season's going to be sort of mid-table, maybe. I don't think there's. I think they're almost settled with the fact that it's not going to be the best of seasons, and they've got such a young squad. They've lost so many key players from last season that I get the feeling that the expectations have gone down. So I don't think there's much expected of them this year, really. So I think he'll be there potentially to the end of the season, unless maybe he gets a job offer.
I think there's a real soft underbelly to that Hammarby team, and that isn't always the manager's fault. There's almost, I want to use the word a bit Spursy about them, really. They just collapse too often. They don't show enough backbone at times. That's what I felt against Elfsborg. It was like they had a 20-minute spell in the second half where they actually played all right, but then it was like, oh, we couldn't score, so we'll just give up for a bit more. Cifuentes is a good manager, and every good manager just can have like a mediocre season, can't they? So I think they'd be foolish to sack him, and more likely to be poached by someone else, to be honest with you, Jonathan. So that's just my 2 cents on it.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? I mean, talking about Hammarby in terms of the backbone, they're the second youngest average age in Allsvenskan, according to our partners, Y Scout, and it shows on the pitch. So I definitely agree with you on that. I think they have a bit of a soft underbelly. I think the transfer window will be interesting, but I haven't really seen too many links in terms of the transfer window. So I feel like they're almost settled with where they are, really. And I think they probably look to have a finish as well as they can, and then maybe sort of look to next season and try and give these young players a bit more experience, another year in the tank, if that makes sense, and go again.
Yeah. Let's go back to Elfsborg then. And this title race is getting quite exciting. Malmo 34 points, Elfsborg 32. I mean, both teams have hardly dropped any points this season. Häcken are actually in third place on 29. Only a 2-2 draw for them against Norrköping. I mean, there's a few questions going around here. Can Elfsborg win this league, Jonathan? Because it looks, the first 5 or 6 games like it was going to be a Malmo procession, but Elfsborg have come, beat Hammarby there, an early goal from Good Jonsson. It was a terrible bit of goalkeeping from Blažević. I thought it was a shocking piece of goalkeeping. And then Johan Larsson, my man, Johan Larsson pops up with the second goal to seal the deal. They looked impressive. They did beat Malmo a few weeks ago. They're a serious contender, right?
You could argue they're the only contender at this point. I mean, I suppose part of this storyline is what's going on with Häcken. They're now 5 points behind Malmo, and a game more played after the draw against Norrköping, obviously at the weekend. Fell asleep a little bit Häcken in that game, really, and took their eye off the ball after a decent start. Went 2-1 down, obviously managed to get back into it, but threw away 2 more points after a decent decent recovery from the defeat at Djurgården back in May and the draw away to Malmo. So that they've stuttered a little bit, and it looks like the big emerging contenders out of that is going to be Elfsborg, 2 points behind Malmo, nearly identical record. Obviously, they've drawn 1 extra game, and Malmo have one extra game. Of course, they've got the exact same goals conceded, 10 each. Malmo have got a slightly better goal difference, 34 scored to Elfsborg's 30. So very similar in terms of numbers even as well, things like that. So we've got to give our massive credit to Elfsborg. We talked about them on the last show, sort of mentioned Jimmy Tellin as one of the main men of this season so far. We sort of recapped the season, didn't we, Steve, in 12 personalities or things. And we mentioned him and talked about the work he's done there. Again, they just kind of comfortably saw off Hammarby, which isn't an easy game. I mean, their last 3 games, they've played all the Stockholm Giants. They've played Djurgården, they've played AIK, and they've played Hammarby, and they've picked up 7 points out of 9, which is not bad at all, really. So they've more than shown that they can compete. They're the only team this season to beat Malmo, and they absolutely sort of took them apart, really, 3-0. So I think we have to take Elfsborg seriously. They only lost 1 game, and that was on the opening day, of course, to Häcken. So we definitely have to take them seriously. It's just a case of, can they win the league?
Yeah, David McDonald actually asked if you think Elfsborg can keep up their momentum. They've lost Jacob Ondrejka, of course, who was a great player. And he also asked here about Malmo. Changes at Malmo with Christiansen being ruled out injured for the rest of the season. Is Otto Rosengren someone who can contribute straight away for them?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for your question. If you've seen our Allsvenskan 10 to watch, then you'll know my thoughts on Otto Rosengren. We've lost one of our 10 to watch, gone to Germany, and Malmo have come in and taken the other one on the 10 to watch. So he's someone I talked about on that show. He is in our 10 to watch this season, and he's got a big move to, of course, from Mjällby to Malmo. Got a shock of blonde hair, really brought sort of it looks like almost like Tintin or something like that. I think I would describe Rosengren as, and very good midfielder, very similar profile, I think, to Hugo Larsson. Ball playing midfielder, maybe not as dynamic going forward, but I think he's a more than capable replacement. I'm surprised he's not gone abroad, maybe, but I think it's a good move to Malmo because he gets to play for a big club and experience that. So I think it's a naturally good move from Mjällby. Obviously, he would have been well drilled under Torstensson at Mjällby. So a good move for him. It's a challenging time for Malmo, actually. They've got a lot of transfers coming in. We'll talk about, obviously, Jorgensen maybe in a different show, or we'll do a profile on him potentially. A few other players they've got, and of course, Pontus Jansson, the former Leeds man at Brentford. He's due to join when the transfer window opens. They've got a few, but they've got a challenging period with injuries at the moment. Obviously, Christensen with that really the sort of sad issue. I think it's like a heart issue that it's going to cause him to miss the whole season. Obviously, Larsson, the transfer, and then the issues with Pena and the driving charges, the drink drive charges, and then obviously they've had a couple of injuries as well in midfield, so they are sort of rolling a little bit light in that area. But they've got a massive squad, Malmo. Someone tweeted the other day their squad, and it was like I think they've got 12 midfielders. So they've definitely got enough talent. The likes of Mahame Sebi even haven't really played. He's had a long injury, so they've got a lot of people they can replace them with. But Malmo will be going to the market in this window, Stephen. I guess we'll talk about some of their transfers maybe in more detail in the coming weeks.
Just a quick word on the fourth place team, Häcken. A couple of questions about them. Apparently, Benny Traore has been linked with Sheffield United. Don't know if you know anything about that, but also thoughts on their Champions League qualifying draw. I think they've got the new Saints, isn't it? A trip to Wales for them. Well, actually, England, isn't it? They're not actually based in Wales, the new Saints. But quite an interesting tie there.
Yep, they'll be playing Welsh opposition, TNS, and formerly Total Network Solutions, wasn't it? I think they changed it to
I always remember them as Total Network Solutions. It was like they announced it on the Vidi printer.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting story behind that club. Not even based in Wales, of course.
Yeah, I don't know too much about them, to be honest, in terms of the location, but I know they're the dominant force in Wales. Obviously, Connor's key nomads as well challenged them for a little bit, but they seem to have reasserted their dominance. Great tie. I mean, that's a great trip for both sets of fans, I imagine. Trip to Sweden and a trip to Wales, maybe, or wherever they're based, but that would be a nice little away trip. I don't know what the question exactly was to you. Like, what is it? Just
some. Oh, Benny Traore to Sheffield United. I mean that's an interesting link if it is one. I don't know whether he'd be suitable for Premier League football yet or not, but obviously he's caught the eye. The Premier League club are interested.
Yeah, the Benny Traore rumours are quite strong. Not sure how much longer it'll be in Allsvenskan, to be honest. I think there was a report that Häcken have turned down a few bids. Celtic and Rangers are very closely linked as well. Seems like someone at Celtic, Steve, is maybe listening to this pod, or certainly they're scouting the area a lot, aren't they? Obviously with Holm and now Traore as well linked. I'm not sure if Benny Traore is ready for Sheffield United Premier League level, but then again, I still don't think he's a number 9, so maybe he could play as a wide player. Interesting one, really. I mean, he's the league's top goal scorer, I believe. He's having a brilliant season. He's a top prospect. His emergence has been really good this year. He'll be sorely missed if he left the league. I think he's a top player and sort of personality, but he probably will leave in the coming weeks. So I'd be very surprised if he's at Häcken by the end of this transfer window. Apparently, they turned down a bid of €3 million roughly, or 2.5 million euros, Steve, which is a lot, isn't it? So they obviously are confident to get a big payday. So yeah, that's the situation with Traore. Sheffield United, there are reports that they are interested as well. So Ajax as well. So yeah, there's a lot of people interested in Benny Traore at the moment.
There have been quite a few transfers out of the league, spearheaded by Hugo Larsson to Frankfurt, of course, for €9 million. A few other departures, though, to talk about. We mentioned Andrejka there to Antwerp. And, well, one of your favourites, Victor Edvarsen, has been snapped up by Go Ahead Eagles for close to €1 million, which, I mean, I've got to say this one that surprised me a little bit. I'm sure it kind of raised your eyebrows as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously he was going to leave. It's been pretty well documented. He's been looking to leave for a while now. He's not really. I think Djurgården. I think the joint managers at Djurgården just kind of. I think they were happy to sell him. If I'm being totally honest, I don't think he matched the hype. Obviously had an amazing season at Degerfors a few years ago and got himself that big move. Had half of the Allsvenskan wanting him and a few teams abroad as well. So he proved himself with that season. But I just feel like Djurgården, I said it many times in this podcast, I think he's got a definite future in the podcast game. Definitely likes to talk, which I can't necessarily say. I can't say that as a criticism considering we have a podcast, but he likes to get in the interviews and things like that. He's always got something to say. And I think I've said it a few times on the show. Like if he could score as many goals as he has interviews, he'd be like Ronaldinho. But Yeah, it's an interesting move. I mean, I was thinking about this, Stephen. I was like, it's not worked out for him at Djurgården. I don't think he's necessarily a title-winning striker for a team like that. But if he goes to the Netherlands, he is still a profile that teams want. You know, he's a tall, big, physical player. He's not necessarily slow. You know, he can play off the last shoulder. He can get in the 6-yard box and finish. He's got a powerful shot on him at times when needed. I just think he lacks a little bit of, I don't even know if it's self-belief or confidence, or I'm not sure if it's maybe a smaller club might suit him actually. And I feel like maybe someone like Go Ahead Eagles could be a good fit for him, because I just feel like the pressure at Jurgen of being the main striker, I felt that was the biggest thing that he didn't quite adapt to. Because at Degerfors, he proved he can score goals. He was, I think, second top scorer or one of the top scorers in the league that season. I just felt that the pressure with so many teams wanting him in Allsvenskan, I don't think he really dealt with it well. I feel like he almost bought the hype, his own hype, if that makes. I think he drank his own Kool-Aid a bit, became really, really confident, and then didn't really back it up with the goals. And I feel that that's maybe his downfall a little bit with Diff. And I feel like they've just been comfortably let him go. I mean, obviously with I think he'll be missed in Allsvenskan because he's a bit of a personality, but I'm not surprised they've sort of let him go. I think EFK Göteborg apparently were rumored to be wanting him as well. So we'll see how he gets on in the Netherlands. I'm not sure what he'll do. Like I said, he's got a decent profile, so he could like surprise us all and do really well. But I don't think he's a massive sort of like legendary player, if that makes sense. It's a decent bit of business. Elias Anderson as well will be leaving. It's just been announced today. He's going to Lech Poznan. The left back who's been brilliant for Djurgården, who've had a decent run actually lately. They've climbed up the table quite nicely, and they're well placed to be the best Stockholm team this year in Allsvenskan, that's for sure. They're sort of picking up points. They've also announced the signing of a player tonight, I think Felix Var. Don't know too much about him, but we'll talk about him maybe on another show. So I guess that's one VAR in Sweden. But yeah, so a lot of activity going around the Djurgården.
Yeah, this VAR guy, Angolan international, I do believe, looks an interesting player for Diff. And I agree with you about Edvarson. I actually think I could see him going pretty well at Go Ahead Eagles. I mean, the amount of goals and chances in that league are very high. So he'll certainly get his opportunities. And there's something about him. It's like, you're right, big club syndrome. It didn't quite work for him, did it? Despite having a strong personality, liking to be the main man, it just, yeah, there was just something wasn't quite the right fit, was he, for Djurgården? And this is now a sort of a nervous time, isn't it, for fans of Allsvenskan clubs. We do often see some good talent leave the league in the summer. I could probably see you in 2 or 3 weeks' time a little bit depressed about, once more talent departing the league, etc., etc. But it's one good thing is the fees seem to be slightly going up. They're getting more now than what they used to.
Yeah, I mean, of course, Larsson, I think he broke the Allsvenskan transfer record, if I'm right in saying. And there's been other big moves. Obviously, on Dredge's left. Lars Older Larsson's gone to Nijmegen. Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to open up a debate, Steve. Is the Eredivisie actually that much better than Allsvenskan? Take out the top 3 teams. I'm not convinced. So I might be sort of throwing the cat amongst the pigeons there a little bit, but I wouldn't necessarily say that maybe Nijmegen is a step up from Häcken necessarily. Team playing in the Champions League. In terms of TNS, obviously you asked me the question there. I think Häcken should win that game, but they are struggling a little bit, Häcken, in terms of players that are leaving. I think that if Sadiq leaves and Traore leaves, that's going to really affect them. But yeah, I mean, throw it out to the listeners. Is Eredivisie that much better than Allsvenskan and Eliteserien these days? I'm not.
It's a good question. Yeah. Take out the top 3.
Take out the top 4 or 5 teams. So a player like Edvardsson, is it necessarily a massive step up? I'm money wise probably, but I'm not necessarily sure it's you get to play in big stadiums like Ajax, but I'm not convinced that the level in terms of technical quality is that much. I think Eredivisie levels dropped quite a bit in recent years at the lower tier of it. And if you look at some of the players who've gone on there to that league, they've done quite well. I mean, so we'll see. I think he could do quite well. There's been a few other transfers that we could probably talk about in coming weeks, but yeah, it's definitely going to be an active period. I think fantasy teams are going to look very different by the end of this month, see what they look like now, because every week there's going to be players leaving. I mean, I've already got an eye on Benny Traore when he's going to be leaving the league, because I'm pretty sure he's not going to be there much longer. And as you said, Steve, there's always a few more. But like you said, the money is coming in a bit more, and I think that is raising the level of Norway and Sweden. And I think that is why I say that nowadays, is it a massive step up? I mean, one player who's left, I just want to say one transfer that I want to give a shout out to him, because we never really talk about this team serious. Marcus Mathisen getting a move to the Bundesliga 2. Now, I really rate him as a centre-back. I think he was one of the best players outside of the big clubs. So he's left, and I think that's a really good signing. And, he's, Bundesliga 2 even, is that is a jump up from Allsvenskan. I think that's a much bigger...
I think so. It is. The good thing about German football, yeah.
But it's a good move for him, you know what I mean? I think the level there... I think there was a player who used to be at EFK who moved to second Bundesliga and just got promoted. I can't remember his name now. The name escapes me. But yeah, there's a few other players who have left the league as well. Obviously, Hugo Larsson going to the Bundesliga, that's a big challenge for him. Ondrejka going to Germany, completing his move. So yeah, there's a lot of movement at the moment, and Steve, as you know, it will continue. One player that we should mention as well before we wrap up, of course, is Victor Fischer. It's been announced that he's retiring from football. So that's a real shame for him. That obviously the issues at AIK, he's terminated his loan there, and it seems like his injury problems have got the better of him at 29. So obviously, if that is the end of his career, we wish him a speedy, an enjoyable retirement. And just on Djurgården to wrap up, obviously one of the other major transfers, talked about Elias Anderson leaving the league, going to Lech Poznan. They've already announced the replacement, Rami Kaib. Steve, he's a Swedish international, and he's joining from Heerenveen. So he will be joining the league when the window opens on the 7th, and joining Djurgården. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to Elias Anderson if he plays in their coming games, because I think his transfer is imminent.
Yeah, I'm just looking through some of these transfers now. And what the hell happened to Oscar Linner? He's left Bromma. I mean, this guy has literally had more clubs than Tiger Woods. I make it like 6 clubs in the last 2 years now. Something has gone badly wrong for Oscar Linner. Where's he going to show up next? He just can't seem to settle down anywhere. That one caught my eye. Final point of order on the show. Wouldn't be a Nordic football podcast, would it, without some talk about VAR? But actually, for once, I've not mentioned it in Norway, have I? Really? So let's keep it that way. But in Sweden, of course, Allsvenskan doesn't use VAR. We actually had a question about that, saying what's the difference between VAR in Scandinavia as opposed to Sweden? Well, Sweden doesn't have it yet. Now, the talk was that it was going to come in next season. But that might well be scuppered now, Jonathan, because clubs are opposing VAR in Sweden, aren't they?
Yeah, I just want to clarify on Rami Kaib. He's actually Tunisian international, but he did play for Sweden's youth team, so apologies on that one. The new Djurgården player. But yeah, in terms of VAR, all the clubs have put out a statement this week, Steve, or a majority of clubs, on their social media accounts saying that they're against VAR. And it seems to be an official position now for the Swedish FA and the clubs. So big news, really, because it makes the league a complete outlier, really, if they don't introduce VAR. I mean, they're basically challenging FIFA and effectively saying they don't support it. So I don't really know how this gets resolved, because I didn't think it was optional, really. So if the clubs are sort of putting out that sort of statement, it is quite a big thing. So this is one to watch, to be honest, because I'd say the level of refereeing this season hasn't been amazing. There's been times where I've thought to myself in games like that wouldn't hurt to have a VAR check for that. But then VAR does completely alter the landscape of a league. So I'm still quite anti-VAR. And I like the Allsvenskan not being reliant on VAR, but I also can see the benefits to some degree. And also just in terms of the status of it as being one of the only European non-VAR leagues, I just wonder how that will affect the league going forward. If they were to take that as an official position, would FIFA step in and sort of say it's not allowed, or I don't know. So watch this space, but it seems clear that the fans have led this. Swedish fans do not like VAR, majority of them. I don't think many fans in general like it, do they? But other countries may be a bit more welcoming to it. It seems like Swedish football fans are really against it. And that's been reflected in what the clubs have done now with this statement. So really interesting one. Watch this space.
Yeah, it certainly does seem the outlier. Maybe they're waiting for VAR to be refined to a system where they actually approve of it. Maybe they're just kind of the pioneers. Maybe VAR won't exist in football in 10 years' time, Jonathan. Maybe we'll go back to how it was. That'd be wishful thinking, wouldn't it? But let's see. I'm quite proud of Sweden for vetoing VAR right now, I must say. In my good books, this league really is. I think that's it for the show. Unless there's something more you needed to add, Jonathan. I think we're done for this episode.
Yeah, and we've had a few listener questions come in, but I don't know if we'll get through them.
I think a few actually came in while we're live talking on it. I think we discussed Luis Almeida came in here about Hammarby. I think we touched on them pretty well. And then he's on about players returning back to Norway and Sweden. Is that a phenomenon? Are they leaving the leagues too soon? That's an interesting point. I think someone did ask you about what you thought of Djurgården's season so far. Neil Dawson. No real talk about Djurgården yet, but we are kind of running out of time, really, so we might have to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think we'll have to wrap it up. I think it's a question about an article from Josimar about David Fofana. I'm not going to get into that now without knowing exactly what the question is and the situation, so I won't comment on that. But maybe ask it next week. I think we're pretty much done for this week. Well done, Steve. We do have more content coming, so keep it tuned. And of course, now that the transfer window is open, it's going to be very exciting the next few weeks. So keep it locked on the Nordic Football Podcast. Thank you for listening.
Certainly will. Remember to follow us on the socials at Nordic Footpod, at Meatman Soccer, and at JF Football. And do subscribe to us on the YouTube channel as well, Nordic Football Podcast. But yeah, from this episode, that's it from me. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.